the Trotskyist idea, which is not even Trotsky's idea, and certainly not Lenin's idea, which is that, like, in a crisis, a small group, like a Vanguard party, can intervene and change history. That's not really what they thought. It's what the Trotskyist sects might think, or it's what they say. The Trotskyists are stuck in 1938. Meaning they think, as Adorno and Horkheimer said, that the Trotskyists imagine that they're going to be reinvited to join the Politburo. Meaning the idea being like an ideological vanguard can like intervene in the existing social democratic and communist parties and movement.
Mm-hmm.
At the, because that existed, there was a social democratic and...
Yeah, you can go in like Trump and completely change the party.
Look, what works for a capitalist politician won't work in the struggle for socialism.
Mm-hmm.
That's a basic rule. What works for them won't work for us. Trump's a billionaire. He can self-fund his campaign. He can, basically offer himself as like negotiator-in-chief and do capitalist politics that way. That's not the proposition. The proposition here is we can't do shit if the working class is inadequately organized.
Welcome to the Cutrone Zone. With me today, as always, for these is the last Marxist, genius, brilliant, co-director on the documentary we're making, Chris Cutrone. Chris, glad to get to talk to you again and to debrief with you after I debriefed with Benjamin Studebaker about the DNC. So just to start with, what were your impressions of the convention?
I was always thinking about two things, the RNC and the DNC. I was always comparing them in my mind because we did the RNC last month. Mm-hmm. And the contrast was pretty stark, I thought. The energy was very different. I felt like the DNC was low energy and the RNC was high energy. And including among the protesters, the dissenters, even like though the protests seemed more vigorous at the DNC, it had a freneticism that to me actually belied a kind of low energy, meaning it didn't have like the anti-abortion protesters of Trump really meant it. And I felt like the protests at the DNC were kind of going through the motions a little bit, even if very histrionically. Right? And so... But in terms of like the Republicans and the Democrats as like anthropological types, it was pretty remarkable how the, Democrats are just machine politico, faceless bureaucrats, and the Republicans are human beings. I mean, it really is. The Democrats are kind of automata, and the Republicans were living, breathing Homo sapiens. For better or for worse, I don't know. What do we want out of our politics? Do we want automata or do we want Homo sapiens? I'm not sure.
Well, I interviewed that I remember. I really interviewed three people. Most of the interviews I didn't conduct at the DNC, but I interviewed three people. One was an old kind of Democracy Now! Style leftist, member of Veterans for Peace, who was there to push an amendment to the Constitution so that Citizens United would no longer be law, right? And so that to get money out of politics. And she was clearly not. She was at the convention, but she was clearly not on the inside of the convention. But she wasn't critical of Kamala either. Then the other person I interviewed was somebody who was selling homemade pens.
Oh yeah,
who was,
that guy.
Yeah, very anti-Trump, former writer for Mad Magazine in the 90s. And then there was a protester performance artist who is also on YouTube, and her name is Crackhead Barney, and she did a very stunning performance around race and politics, dressed, in flamboyantly and with white powder.
She was in whiteface.
Yeah, she was in whiteface. And none of those people struck me as anything other than human. And none of them struck me as very connected though, to the Democrats.
Those people. I'm talking about the Democrats, like the people with the lanyards. The people in suits, the people in uniform T-shirts, like the people who, are really the party.
Right. I think I tried to stay away from them. They scared me. but
they also generally were less amenable to being interviewed than the Republicans had been. If I recall, we had better luck with the similar Republicans being willing to be interviewed than we had with the Democrats. And I think that with the Democrats, what we were in the face of was a party line being imposed, and everyone being very anxious about maintaining the party line, because it's sort of iffy, meaning, it's like just announced, like in your inbox today, the party line, memorize it, don't depart from it. And then everyone's like, yeah, I don't know if I understand. I guess I'll do that. Whereas the Republican Party, was very janky. And it was very clear that people disagreed within the Republican Party, within the Trumpified Republican Party, that people disagree a great deal. And they're not all on the same page. They're not all actually. I know that my liberal friends, my Democrat friends, will find this hard to believe. They're not just spouting talking points, actually. And, and that's not necessary. And part of that is because who could take talking points from Trump? How is that even possible? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, because as soon as you say the same thing that Trump said, it means something entirely different than when he said it. Whereas with the Democrats, it's like, everybody says the same thing, means the same thing, and it's kind of remarkable that way. Because that was the news story. The news story was they rescued their candidacy for president. They got rid of Biden, put in Kamala. They got the convention together. It all went without a hitch. Like, miraculously, it turns out that the party is strong. Whereas the Republicans, it's like, what party? What is this party strong? Is it a party? What is it? Right? The Republicans made a show of force. They have a party, and it's strong.
I mean, the Democrats.
Oh, excuse me, the Democrats. Yeah.
The
Republicans, no. The Republicans have Trump, and then they have people who are sort of more or less desperately trying to keep up with whatever comes out of his mouth. And I can't help but find that refreshing. Because it's like, do we want, again, Robama? There was a wonderful right-wing little video, Robama. It was Trump versus Robama. And Obama, I mean, can I just tell you this? I stole away in order to be able to watch the speeches. I watched them in the bar across the street from the convention center. I know some of us were in the convention center watching it in person, but I made a point of like watching the speeches either live, and they were so late that we were getting home late, but the headline speeches were still happening at like 11, right? And so I watched, pretty much all the headline speeches, especially Michelle and Barack. Especially Barack Obama. And Barack Obama's speech reminded me of why I'm not just a Marxist, I'm a socialist. In other words, I was like, yes, we need a revolution, we need a revolutionary movement, we need a revolutionary party to usher these people off the historical stage. Just get rid of these people. Just put them into retirement. Obama, especially. I don't feel that way as much about like people like Hillary and Trump, because I feel like I think we talked about this. Comrade Hillary, Comrade Clinton, Comrade Trump. Like they might have a role to play under the dictatorship of the proletariat. The Obamas, no.
Well, what is the difference here in your mind between the speech that Hillary Clinton gave, which I watched, and the speech that Obama gave? Hillary Clinton was all about, this is a great historic moment for women. She's a woman. I was the first woman to be nominated for president. She's going to actually win. You know, that was the thrust of her speech.
Look, Hillary's not an empty suit.
Mm-hmm.
But Obama is. And Kamala is.
Well, Kamala certainly
Biden
is.
also was not an empty suit. Biden was also not an empty suit.
Right.
I mean, he was a major senator. I don't know if you remember. He was a prominent senator for his career. He was there, Foreign Relations Committee, Judiciary Committee. He was one of these senators constantly being mediatized.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He is a statesman in a way that Obama is not. Bill Clinton was a statesman. Hillary Clinton in some ways even more than Bill Clinton. But the Clintons are statesmen.
Yeah, okay. So
You know?
what and the distinction
They're not
is
politicos. Do you know? Like Obama and Kamala are like politicos, not statesmen. Politicians, not statesmen. Politics,
in other
not
words,
statesmanship.
So you think that the difference there is that Biden and Hillary and Bill had a vision of what they wanted the country to become?
And the role of the U.S. in the world, everything. I mean, so by the way, asterisk, footnote, I'm using the language that the Democrats themselves used. If you recall, they said there are politicians who are in it for themselves. There are statesmen who are in it for the country.
Right. That was one thing that I thought that they really hit hard on with Trump, that I was wondering why they made the decision to do that.
They've been saying it all along, Doug. Remember that Obama said that Trump only was in it to burnish his brand, and that Trump didn't intend to win the presidency and was embarrassed to be thrust into that position inadvertently. In other words, completely ignoring the fact that Trump has a vision.
Yes, but I mean, after the assassination attempt, I would think that it would be much more difficult to make that case. It would make sense in 2018. It could at least be rhetorically effective, but I just don't understand how anyone could think today that Trump.
I mean, he's willing to take a bullet. Like, so what was the phrase that they had? They said, you know, he's only in it for himself and his billionaire friends. And it's like, does Trump have any billionaire friends? Does he have any friends at all? You know? And is he willing to take a bullet for them? I don't think so.
No.
Right? So I think that the way the Democrats would spin it is that Trump's in it after almost being assassinated, just at a pure, like, it heightens the narcissism, if you will. It's like, oh, it's just pure sociopathy or pure spite, you know, that Trump is insisting. And I feel like, I mean, he says he has better things to do with his life. He'd rather golf than be president. I believe him.
I believe him too.
You know?
I think I believe him.
So it's Citizen Trump. We always have to keep in mind citizen. You know, I mentioned Comrade Trump, Citizen Trump. You know, it's. I think I wrote about this one of my articles. Politics is a dirty business, but somebody's got to do it. That attitude. It's in my Herbert Spencer article. It's about, like, we don't have glory like warriors. You know, we're not led by the warrior caste. It's not glory. It's work. It's a job. You know. But it is a job, and it's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. And it is therefore a personal sacrifice for a member of the bourgeoisie at any level to go into politics, or at least it should be. It shouldn't be, well, what else am I going to do with my life except be a politician, which is the sense you get from Kamala and Obama.
You know, before we started recording, I was telling you I'd made Benjamin Studebaker read some of my fiction, and which led me to thinking again. Every once in a while think about writing fiction. Again, I do want to do that, but I really do enjoy writing fiction quite a lot more than I enjoy doing this.
This is misery. This is misery.
Especially, but all along when I was writing fiction, I felt guilty that I should be more political, that I should be engaged in a socialist project or doing something to change politics, because it felt self-indulgent to write fiction.
Oh no, that's a very socialist realist. It's very Stalinist.
I know. I don't think it is.
Yeah, there.
Yeah, but I don't think that's true. But I do think, to the extent that you have to sacrifice something like writing fiction or playing golf or um, whatever else, whatever other occupation you might, or being away from your family, to do politics, it is a sacrifice.
It is.
Yeah, but
and
I wanted
a grim nobility to it in bourgeois society, meaning it really is different. Bourgeois society is different. The role of the politician is different. There's something unseemly about politicians, and there's a pathos to the citizen who says, fuck it, I'm going to enter the political realm that I otherwise have contempt for.
Have you seen the movie The Candidate with Robert Redford?
Sure, of course. Watched it not too long ago, actually.
That is quite a bit. I watched it a little while ago too. I think probably further back than you did, but he reminded me of Obama when I watched it, because
you mean a kind of a vessel for other people.
He got taken up. He said, you can be a senator. We're going to get behind you. We think you're the guy. You should run. We don't expect you to win this time, but you can get your ideas out. And then as he goes through the process, his ideas get pushed aside, and he does win. And he's
a little existential crisis. Yeah.
And the last line of the movie is, as he's senator, like, well, now what do I do? Like turning to his handlers, like, tell me what's next. And
absolutely,
Kamala Harris certainly has that quality.
I mean, I have a mixed mind about Kamala Harris, because she was a prominent senator. I guess being a senator from California might put you in that position, but she, put herself out there, especially, I thought disgracefully in things like the Kavanaugh hearings. In fact. But and also her campaign in 2020, I thought was credible. So I was a little bit shocked that she washed out. I mean, if you think about that field of candidates, right? The people who ran for the Democratic nomination in 2020, again, who are the statesmen, who are the politicos, who are the empty suits? And I feel like they're all empty suits except Bernie and Biden.
Yeah.
Warren, maybe she's some kind of a statesman, but I feel like she's a statesman who basically her ceiling is senator. Do you know? But Buttigieg, Kamala, these are just holograms, and they really are. And I feel like Biden stood for something, Bernie stood for something, and maybe Elizabeth Warren. But Elizabeth Warren, again, it's kind of like iffy, meaning I don't think that's presidential material, shall we say. And there were others. Wasn't like Cory Booker, another prominent senator. He was a candidate, and I felt like he was also a kind of like lack of imagination, kind of like, what else is he going to do with his life except run for president? Amy Klobuchar, I guess, maybe, I don't know, but again, there's a fine line between like someone who's just like, I don't know, a craftsman of the Democratic Party agenda, as opposed to a dutiful servant. Right. So Klobuchar might be more in the former category, and so might deserve a little bit more respect. And, but I just thought, that whole field, and similarly with like the people that Trump has run against, are these statesmen? Like Nikki Haley, is she a statesman? Nah. Like, what's her vision really? So,
well, this is something that I want to talk about it on a meta level a bit, because I feel like that distinction between a politician and statesman is one which comes down to an intuitive judgment more than any.
Most things in life, Doug, are judgments. They're not logical. They're not classifications like that. There aren't neat delineations. It is a judgment.
This is why I want to talk to you about this, because I found myself trying to retreat into reason as I go through this process of watching this campaign, because my intuitive judgment is to become very outraged at the Democrats and to humanize Trump because I feel like he's being lied about, and that I also feel like, oh, I've been kind of misled about some of the things about Trump for a while now, and it's worthwhile to.
There's a reason to be outraged about that.
Right.
You know?
So, but when I start to try to be critical and reasonable, I start to think things like, well, okay, of the two candidates, clearly the more authentic of the two is
obviously
Trump.
It's Trump.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But will Trump actually be able to accomplish the things that I think we need to accomplish? For instance, rolling back the surveillance state. I don't think that's likely. I think that's,
No, I mean, that's we can't have that kind of hope. I mean, look, what's going to come down to, it is like a judgment thing, meaning, and it's a tone thing, because one has to ask oneself certain questions. Why the hysteria around Trump? Why? Because I feel like we are given from on high by the authorities the message, you should be worried about Trump. And it is different from George W. Bush and Reagan and Nixon. It's harsher. So I see in that a couple of things. One is it's an expression of where the Democrats are. The other is about Trump. And I feel like, okay, so Trump is not a fascist. He's not the furthest right-wing Republican. He's not some kind of hardcore, like extreme Republican in any respect, however you understand that. Like whether it's ideologically right or whether it's kind of ruthless, like, kind of Reaganite agenda, but to the max or something. However one might conceive of it, he's obviously not any of those things. So then what kind of a threat does he represent? And, for me, both in 2016, but especially now, in 2020, it's the COVID election and whatever. So, but especially now, if Trump is defeated, he's defeated by a political machine. Whereas in 2016 or 2020, he's defeated by a politician in an election. He's not just, rolled over by the Borg. And that's what we were dealing with at the DNC. This is the Borg.
No, I definitely agree with you, actually, about that. And that is, but that's hard. That's a judgment that I can't justify.
It's an image. It's an aesthetic image. That's what makes it a judgment. Right. In other words, does it ring true as a metaphor or not? That's for our listeners to decide.
Right. But I definitely, the reason I feel like that's true is particularly because of the way in which Kamala was put in as a nominee, and in the context of 4 years or 3.5 years of building up, and longer really, of building up an apparatus to control what people say and how people think, both online and offline, and the way in which the deleterious effect this has had on people I know on the left.
So this is the thing. I'm not sure that it's so different now than it was in the past, but I think we notice it differently. And the medium for it is a little different. I mean, obviously, we're in the time of, we're beyond the 24-hour news cycle.
Right.
It's much more micrological temporally. It's like the morning, noon, and night news cycle, not the 24-hour news cycle, right? It's not the morning edition and the evening edition of the paper. It's like hour by hour, right? And so that makes us notice it, right? I think the Democrats, are a machine. I mean, the Republicans are definitely a machine. I've lived in Republican counties. The Republicans are definitely a machine, but not the same way as the Democrats. And also, not in a way that speaks to us, So the Republican Party might be a machine of like small-time capitalists and like church people, and they have their machine. The Democrats, like, I just know, look, a friend of mine, who I won't say her name because I don't want to have it get back to her in any way, but she was working for a labor union as staff at the labor union, and she was hired. And she thought she was hired to have like a long-term position, but really she was just hired to do turnout for the election. And she was sent down to Gary, Indiana, And she was basically registering people to vote by like driving them to McDonald's, buying them a meal, like poor people, in exchange for registering as a Democrat and then voting in the election. And so, you know, I mean, like the turnout machine for the Democratic Party here in, you know, Chicago, you know, it is, but more so in a place like Indiana, because Indiana is like a red state. You know, in other words, here they kind of like, you know, how important is it for them to get poor black people to vote? Less important than in Gary, Indiana, actually. And so, you know, but I just, you know, the cynicism of it is profound. And again, the targets of it, the people that they're targeting, it's just different. So it hits you at a different kind of gut level, you know, that it's like, you know, do I really care about the people that the Republicans are taking advantage of? I do. But I have to say, I kind of care more about the people that the Democrats exploit and the fact that they exploit them and how they exploit them. You know, it just hits home differently, you know? And, you know, I mean, because, you know, we're in the wokeism world or whatever. And it's like, you know, and that's like code language or dog whistling, you know, for like racism, sexism, and homophobia. No, I hate the fact that women, minorities, and gay people, LGBTQ people, are turned into this fodder for this machine. That's what I you know, that's what I can't stand. And that they are made into wards of the machine, they're made into dependents on the machine, and also that the Democrats do things that wind up a backlash. In other words, the Democrats do things that make their constituents vulnerable. And then they take advantage of that. Like, it's really stark. And that's what we saw. You know, like, look, like, in other words, it's like a McGovern style election, like convention that we went to. This is what America looks like. You know, it's all minorities, right? As opposed to the Republican convention. I mean, we saw a lot of minorities. We saw a lot of women. We saw some gay people. But generally speaking, it wasn't like that was the spectacle. Whereas the Democrats, it's like, this is the black party, especially in Chicago. I don't know if you were struck by that.
I didn't get overwhelmed by that fact when I was there, but you know, I didn't go into the convention hall.
I'm sensitive to it. You know, like the NAACP kids who were all wearing the t-shirts.
Yeah. The problem with them is we approached them several times and it seemed like they would have,
because they
couldn't be interviewed.
They were told not to be interviewed, and I'm like, well, then why are they here? No, they're here
to pass out literature for the NAACP, and that's why.
But they're here to also get marching orders from the Democratic Party. In other words, they're getting their talking points. That is the turnout machine. That is the establishment. Remember what Bernie said, that he's up against the establishment in the primaries in 2016? And the establishment is the NAACP right there. That's what we were dealing with right there. Those are the people who were canvassing against Bernie in 2016.
And they were like in their
teenagers. 20s. Like young people.
Right.
You know? And I'm just like, fuck. What kind of social and political education, again, is the Democratic Party giving young black people? It's telling them there are these white racists out there who are threatening you, and, you know, like, your life is in danger unless the Democrats are elected.
Yeah.
It's fucked up.
Yeah.
And they're telling young women that too. Like, you might die from an illegal abortion if the Republicans are elected.
Meanwhile, just to play devil's advocate for a second, the Republicans are telling their base, maybe not so young people, that there are Marxist, communist, transgender people on the march.
And there are MS-13 gang members waiting to kidnap and rape your grandchildren.
Right. Yeah.
Which there are, Doug.
Well, there also are racist white people who are a threat to black people.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to play
How
devil's
many racially motivated murders are there by white people of black people in the United States compared to how many victims of gang crime? And not just white victims. I'm talking about victims, meaning
no, I know.
We're not supposed to care about black and Latino victims, right? Because don't talk about that. Black and black crime is a myth. Did you ever read an article with that headline? There have been many.
I don't understand how they can say that. White on white crime is not a myth. Black on black crime is not a myth.
The reason that it's a myth is that when people mention it, they're mentioning it for no good reason. That's why it's a myth. In other words, it's a reality, but then when the Republicans talk about it, it's a myth.
Well, look, as a socialist, right?
Yeah.
I've always thought, no, if people are living in terribly squalid, inhuman conditions that breed crime and corruption and ill health, socialists should care about that. We should want to do something to change those conditions one way or another. And so
Nancy Pelosi, remember when Trump said MS-13 members chopped up a young girl on Long Island, and Trump was like, they're animals. Why do they use knives, not guns? Because they want it to hurt, right? And then Nancy Pelosi said, as a Catholic, I refuse to refer to any human being as an animal. And it's like, come on. It's a figure of speech.
Right.
The reason you call a human being an animal is as a moral condemnation. You're saying they're depraved. You're saying they, through their actions, have endangered their own humanity.
Right.
You're not denying their humanity. You're actually calling them to their humanity and saying humans should not act like animals. Because obviously animals don't do the things that humans do. Like animals don't commit crimes the way humans do, right? Only humans are capable of being depraved in a way that you call a human an animal.
I read on Twitter that there was a dolphin that was sexually assaulting people on the beaches of, I don't know, California or something.
Crime, that's distinct.
No, I know, but the headline was, they're finally going to arrest the dolphin.
I don't think Trump was saying Latinos do this out of instinct.
No, I know. Of course he wasn't.
He wasn't. He was making a moral condemnation. But then the Democrats are there to say, oh, that's racism. It's actually not racism. It specifically is not racism, whereas calling it racism, that's the racism, because you're saying you can't condemn the criminal actions of minorities if you're white.
Or at all, really.
Or at all, right? Because whatever, Christians should forgive everything. And I'm like, yeah, Nancy Pelosi, I'm not so sure. Catholicism, whatever. And, but again, it's all political rhetoric, and it's very exploitative. I mean, obviously, Trump's demagogy. I mean, look, Trump is a demagogue, total demagogue. He's any law and order person who gets into the gruesome details of crime is obviously a demagogue. Obviously. Right? And there's demagogy and there's demagogy. So there's demagogy that hits your working class New York Post reader. And then there's demagogy that hits your college professor. And I'm sorry, I'm more sensitive to the outrage of the demagogy that hits the college professor. In other words, when I'm walking around the halls of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and I'm looking at my colleagues and I'm talking to them and they are believing the demagogy of the Democrats, I actually think that's worse than the working class people of color reading the New York Post. I trust how they're getting the meaning of the demagogy more than I trust my colleagues with the Democrat demagogy, because they might give it like a kind of a hypostasized reality that it doesn't have, whereas the New York Post reader is going to know this is rhetoric, this is more morality, this is like, like just intuitively they get that. Whereas we're with the intellectual fools.
Well, this is something that I wanted to bring up. What bothers me about the Democrats is the damage they're doing to people I know.
Yeah.
And because now we're at this point where you can't, something happens like the way Biden was pushed out of office, which, by the way, I wasn't against him being removed per se, because if he is cognitively declined, if he really is,
but his speech, did you see this article? It was in the New York Times, in fact, that Biden's speech at the convention proved that he was not in cognitive decline.
Right, but if he was, okay, then I think that it would be incumbent upon Kamala Harris and the Democratic
Party. But we were lied
Party
to about that. You know, I've been watching Fox News for the last 3.5 years, and every night Hannity had clips of Joe Biden showing supposedly his cognitive decline. And it's selectively edited, and even the selectively edited bits didn't show it. It did not show it. And there's like, the Republicans have to hammer on this because it's also not true. So they have to sort of keep saying it. And but literally each night I'm sitting here with my husband and we're watching it. And it's like, yeah, you know, Biden misspoke and Biden looks foolish, but it's not what the Republicans are saying that it is. Like, obviously not, you know? And whereas now, of course, the Fox News people, the Republicans are like, finally, the Democrats see what we've been seeing for the last 3.5 years. And it's like, this is all bullshit. Like, this is extreme bullshit. Look, Biden, I will defend. And I will also say, by the way, I will defend Kamala as the candidate, but not for the reason that you might think.
Well, can I just make my point was, if it was true that he was in cognitive decline, then they would have to actually go through the constitutional process. Yeah, and remove him from office. They can't use that as an excuse to pull him from the race alone. And to do
they pressured him to make the decision himself. He did make the decision himself. And I don't think that it was because they were saying, otherwise we will send Hunter Biden to Guantanamo Bay, or, you know, like, I don't think they were holding anything over his head. They might have
said that they said they would use the 25th Amendment if he didn't do it himself.
Yeah, so it'd be a disgrace. And I don't believe that they would have really done that, though. And I also believe Biden when he said that he himself felt that the Democrats, by coming out publicly, had made it so that the election would just be about that, and therefore he had to step out. And I think that's the truth.
That probably may be the truth. I don't know what the truth is, but I do know. I don't know. I'm agnostic.
A public, discursive environment for him that was untenable, and it's very weird. I mean, so.
Look, my problem is that the official story, the story we're supposed to believe, doesn't hold up. If he was in cognitive decline, then they ought to have used the 25th Amendment to
they should have removed him from office. But you know that they.
And if he wasn't in cognitive decline,
right,
then this was.
We talked about this though, didn't we? That Kamala has to thread the needle. She has to be a newcomer and an incumbent at the same time.
Right, which I don't think that I think average Democrats should be skeptical about that, and not that they shouldn't support their candidate, but that they should demand more than simply receiving marching orders.
I mean, here it is. And Trump is right about this. This is how they're stealing the election. By swapping out the candidate at a late stage. This is, in fact, how they're stealing the election. Meaning Biden was losing, and they needed to either turn that around or accept that. But instead, they cheated. And they did cheat. Now, how is it not a cheat? Biden saying at that late stage that he's not going to be the candidate, they had no choice but Kamala. They had no choice, absolutely no choice, because the states have their primary systems. There were red states that had Democrat primaries that Biden won. If she had not been the candidate, there would have been lawsuits. It would have been another constitutional crisis, meaning how are candidates selected? And I agree with you that I uphold the right of civil society, voluntary organizations, political parties to choose their own candidate. However, in the United States, we have this primary system in which state governments actually do conduct these elections on behalf of the parties. And it's very tricky, right? Because that merging of party and state is bad, but it's a fact. And therefore, they could not undo the results of the primaries. And she was on, it was understood that she was the vice presidential candidate that he was running with, right, in terms of the primaries. And other things like she had to get the money that he had raised only she could get the money that he had raised.
Yeah, they violated campaign finance law to get her that money.
No, that's the legality of it. The legality of it is that it could only go to her. It couldn't go to anyone else.
Yeah, but they did also violate campaign finance laws to get her that money, because the way they did it was through Act Blue, and they pretended it was small donations because there are restrictions on how much money can be given. I mean, I'm not sure of every single detail of this, but I
hadn't heard this story. I'm open to this.
Yeah, I read that there actually is going to be lawsuits about this that are already put in place.
I think it's also very ambiguous, right? But I think,
those lawsuits won't be decided until after the election, so it's a moot point.
Won't matter.
Right?
Yeah. No, it definitely won't matter. But I'm just thinking, in the time of the debate, before Biden chose not to run again, in that time, what was happening? So yes, Democrats were pressuring him, but lawyers were investigating all these things, Doug. The Democratic Party is just thousands of lawyers. That's what they were doing. In that interval of time, all the lawyers were gaming out everything.
Yeah.
And not because they're afraid of Democrats suing other Democrats, but they're afraid of creating an opening for the Republicans.
Right.
And there are red states that held Democrat primaries.
Right. There were Republicans who did sue over campaign finance laws being violated in the way that the money went to Kamala after
the state governments. It could have risen to a constitutional issue.
Right. Yeah. I believe
election system.
But all of that should be something that a Democrat should think about when they're considering who to vote for.
No, because to think about that means like the Trump era. What's great about the Trump era is that it lets us see how the machine works. Not just not the Democratic Party machine, the political machine, the legal system, the constitutional order. He's stressing the system. And so the cracks are showing, the seams are showing, however you want to, maybe they're not cracks, maybe they're just seams. The machinery is noticeable. And we have to take the learning opportunity of that, but also realize that the political system is an ad hoc system. They make up a lot of it as they go along. And, the issue of presidential immunity, it is a problem that what was implied and understood has now been made explicit. It makes it more fragile, dicey, politically contentious to make it explicit. So all of these things, all these stress things. So to get back to my point about why they're so hostile to Trump, because he's doing this and it's unwelcome. And the Republicans have not been able to really control it. And so the Republicans have become the enemy in a way that isn't quite the case. Like the bipartisan consensus is a victim of this because they were not able to keep it under control. Now so Trump was a challenge in a way that Bernie actually was not, because Bernie is a longtime senator. He understood how things work, and Trump is this amateur. And he is this citizen Trump, and he's like, yeah, why can't we target our allies with nuclear weapons? Didn't he say that on the first day in office? He went to his national security team, and he's like, oh, I see that all the countries targeted by our nuclear weapons are just these few countries. Well, what if I want to nuke Germany? Why is that not available to me? But in other words, well, yeah, that's kind of interesting to know, isn't it? Especially because that the Pentagon has plans for the U.S. militarily invading and overthrowing the government of all of our allies. Right? They have contingency plans for everything. But I guess nuking is just one step too far. So, but again, that is his attitude. His attitude is like, well, why can't I invite the Taliban to Camp David to have a ceremony ending the war? Oh, no, you can't do that. Do you remember he wanted to do that?
No, I've come to the conclusion that Trump is the same as Mr. Smith, only if Mr. Smith was like your quasi-racist uncle. But nonetheless, just a citizen who goes into Washington to clean things up as he understands it.
And doesn't know any better, doesn't understand the way things really work, doesn't really understand how things formally work, but kind of understands how things formally work. But then it suddenly is revealed that the way things formally work isn't the way they really work.
Yeah, and my feeling about when I say Democrats should be concerned and should notice these things is that when the formal system falls away and how things really work are exposed, people should not turn away and blind
They do turn
themselves to
away.
that.
I know. They don't want to
And
know.
like I've noticed that this is like a trend in films. I saw a film with Nicolas Cage. I think it was, I forget what its name was, but he was a character who could enter other people's dreams. In fact, he was entering other people's dreams involuntarily. And none of the film was about questioning what reality was or how that was possible. It was all about, how can I become a viral sensation and sell a book now that I'm entering other people's dreams? And that was what the character was after. And that's how, and no one even brought it up. No, best friend character or Jiminy Cricket, acting as your conscience. Hey, maybe you should be curious about what's happening in the real world. That didn't even enter into the picture at all.
Instrumentalization.
Yeah. And I just thought, we're making science fiction films where the main characters aren't curious about the world and where the science fiction premise doesn't inspire any sense of wonder or questioning. And I feel like that's a problem politically.
It is. I mean, I was watching a YouTube video this morning about the deep state. It's some millennials. They were like, what is the deep state? And they were like rediscovering like the Church Commission. And they were like, oh, how fucked up. The US used to do this, that, and the other thing. And then for a while it seemed chastened, but then it comes back with 9/11. And I'm like, well, it wasn't really chastened. And there were the 80s and the 90s, and a lot of shit was going on. Oliver North. But they were kind of shocked. They were like, oh, wow. In the Cold War, like, there were so many new agencies created that no one knew about all of them.
Right.
I mean, that used to be like a metaphor, wasn't it? Like of the mid 20th century, the idea that like states produced like departments and bureaucracies that people didn't even know existed.
Right.
Right. That used to be like a trope. And like, these millennials, all grown up now, and they're like, holy shit, this stuff really happened back in the day. And it's like, yeah, but like, it's a shock to them. I mean, people just don't know, Doug.
Well, I remember there was a movie from the early 90s, I'm sorry, and it was starring Robert Redford. It was called Sneakers, and there's a scene in the movie.
Sneakers is great.
There's a scene in the movie where the actor who was on 30-something at the time comes in, and he's an NSA agent. And Robert Redford says, oh, you're with the NSA. And he says, I cannot confirm that agency exists. Right. And that was like 1991, that it couldn't even be confirmed.
There was a true story that Fazal and I watched about the Vietnam War, where someone from Brooklyn went to give his buddies who were serving in Vietnam beers, or maybe Boston, someplace, right? And how he got to the front line when it was impossible, and it's during the fall of Saigon. It's a true story, Doug. It's crazy. It's good. Was he realized that he could pretend to be a CIA agent because he was dressed in civilian clothes. And so the way to get to the front lines was to refuse to answer questions. Like, who are you? What are you doing? And you refuse to answer the questions, and then the military people are like, oh, he's CIA. Let him do. Right? And then at a certain point, it's revealed, of course, that he wasn't CIA. But nonetheless, I thought it was kind of interesting, because it does give you a sense, of, we've talked about this, the paranoid world of the state. Like when you enter into the halls of power at the level of the state, not politicians, but the state. And I think that's the other thing the millennial video was talking about how they would give money, how Congress people would authorize funds without asking what they were for, right? And so they would say, don't tell me what it's for. It's better for me not to know, because if you tell me, then I might have to acknowledge it at some point. Right. So if you really want to keep it secret, you want my authorization, you want me to approve the funds, but you should not tell me what it's for. because then it will make me liable as well as you. And a version of that must still go on, despite the
church. It does. No, we know it still goes on, but the Church Commission did chasten things a bit, and I do think that
maybe for the Ford administration, just for those years, because I feel like as soon as Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski came in, they just did whatever.
I guess. I mean, my feeling was that that Reagan with Iran Contra was doing things abroad that were illegal, and then Clinton, after the bombing of the federal building.
Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah, the Oklahoma City bombing. That gave him an excuse to turn the apparatus inward on a level that only built up after that and after 9/11. And then after Trump and the Russian collusion story, which was a lie, the apparatus was expanded even further. So we're more controlled now than we were in 1992. There's more
probably
tendrils.
No, and that's definitely true. So anyway, so that's like, I was just seeing like the minions of the Democratic Party. We weren't seeing the deep state. We were seeing the Democratic Party. There's a difference. But we were seeing the ruling party. I always insist on this. Especially, I think for our generation, it's hard, but also for the millennials, it's hard because when they came of age, they had 2 terms of George W. Bush. And so there might have been this idea that somehow the Republicans are the ruling party and the Democrats are the captured opposition. But it's quite the opposite. I insist that ever since FDR, the Democrats are the ruling party and the Republicans are the captured opposition. I think that the dissident right is correct about that. This is still the New Deal world. It is still that party system with some changes coming out of the 60s. But not really, not so profound. Because the Democrats have maintained control even though they lost the South, although they've regained a great deal of the South.
That point is very, very difficult for most of the American left to accept. And I think it would cause people, if they were to accept that, to really have to come to terms with the way in which they've gone along with the system that they're supposedly opposed to and wanting to change. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to accept. I accept it's true, but I'm maybe more willing than most to accept that I've wasted some parts of my life.
You mean being anti-Republican? I mean, you and I, we had 12 years of Republicans through the 80s and into the 90s. And then Bill Clinton seemed to be someone who had conceded something to the Reagan Revolution. And then we had George W. Bush. So in our own lifetime, we've seen Nixon and Reagan and then George W. Bush. Like, it looks more like even or even tilted towards the Republicans. But what we have to understand is that the Democrats, and this is again in the face of the party machine and living in a place like Chicago and in Illinois, the Democrats govern the vast majority of people in the United States at a municipal and state level. They govern the population of the United States in a way that the Republicans do not. And so they are the ruling party in that respect. But I also think that in the neoliberal era, especially, it could no longer be said that the Republicans are the party of Wall Street, because that's the old New Deal myth. The New Deal myth is that the Democrats are Main Street and the Republicans are Wall Street, because that's what it looked like in the 30s. And that's the myth, right? That should have been put to rest a long, long time ago, but somehow remains because it's the Democratic Party. Like, look, our view of the world is through Democratic Party propaganda. It is. That's the thing. So the left thinks that it is like a pressure on a scrappy underdog oppositional party that makes too many compromises. And it's like, no, you are trying to participate in the dominant party.
Right.
And that's the realization that they need to have. because then it changes everything. And it's different in a place like the UK. The Tories are the dominant party, and Labour is the captured opposition, not in the United States. And obviously, it's apples and oranges. The UK is whatever. Airstrip 1, the United States is the United States, so it is different. But if we think of analogies, that's one of the reasons why the Labour Party is different. I mean, the Labour Party has a solid, organized labor constituency in a way that the Democrats don't. There's a formal relationship between the Trades Union Congress and the Labour Party in a way that there is not between the AFL-CIO and the Democrats. Mm-hmm. But really, the difference is that the Tories are the establishment. And here, the Democrats are the establishment. And, I don't know why that's so difficult, but it's the reality.
Well, I think it's, look, if you have spent a decade, especially for millennials, because it's not as difficult for me to come to that conclusion. But if you spend a decade trying to influence, win seats within, have a presidential candidate dominate the party, the Democratic Party, and then to realize that all along you were actually trying to find a place within the established party that had been running the system that you opposed, for your entire life, the whole time, then, you have to reconsider what your motivations were, what your entire way of thinking. You have to be able to reconsider a lot of things. And I think that's very difficult for people.
Here's a little known fact. And of course it will be fact checked and contradicted, but nonetheless it is a fact. Mm-hmm. Democrats controlled Congress from 1934 till 1994. Mm-hmm. So the Newt Gingrich Republican Revolution was a big deal because Reagan presided over a Democrat majority Congress that went along with him.
Yeah, and they got along great.
They did. Yeah. There's a Reagan movie. I want to see it, especially because it's been suppressed by social media, promotion of this film. And I'm sure the film is critical of Reagan, but somehow Facebook said to the producers of the film that promotion of the film might constitute election interference.
Wow.
A biopic on Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, you see why I'm so outraged?
Yeah. No, it's very crazy. But at least Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
At least Zuck came through. And did you notice that suddenly he looks more mature? Suddenly, no, overnight, it's like babyface is gone, and now he's a man.
I haven't seen a recent picture of him, but I believe that.
It's weird.
I know he had a makeover. He changed his hair, and he doesn't.
No, but his face it's like he's a grown man now. He's not like a 20-year-old anymore. It's like
right.
That happens. When you reach a certain age, suddenly you're a man. In your 30s, and so it's like, and then you do know that he was forced to say that. So this isn't just a statement that he made. It's because he had been subpoenaed by the Republican majority Congress, and they had brought him to testify, and then they sent him follow-up questions that he was legally obligated to answer, and to answer truthfully. Mm-hmm. Meaning if he had ever said anything to anyone, like, I feel pressured by the government, like, he could not lie in that letter, and he turned it in on the deadline.
Yeah. I think RFK Jr. he has a lawsuit on this, and I think he may win this lawsuit. But all of this is not to say that suddenly, for a lot of reasons, I'm not suddenly tempted to join in with the Republicans and as if because they're not the establishment party, they're a great option, right?
I think the opposition is obligated. In other words, look, Biden was obligated to try to unseat Trump. The opposition is obligated to oppose. Otherwise, why do we have a political system at all? But anyway.
No, I agree with you. I'm glad for them. Because without them, there wouldn't have been these hearings on the weaponizations of government. That without them, we wouldn't have been, no one would have pressured Fauci about gain-of-function research. And I'm surprised on Twitter, even now, people are like, when I say Fauci lied about gain-of-function research to Congress, people call me all sorts of names and deny it.
Can I say something about partisanship? So there's a uni party. There's bipartisan consensus. There's whatever, right? There's one party with two wings, both right wing, right? The Crocodile, right? The party of property, by which he meant capital, and with two right wings, Democrat and Republican. That's all true. Mike McNair of the CPGB, he also has this idea that there's like the Constitutional Party, and then you'd have a revolutionary party that's aiming to overthrow the constitutional order, but basically any party that signs on to the Constitution, that these are just factions of one party. And Haas was in a debate recently where he was upholding the one-party state. He's like, dictatorship of the proletariat means one-party state. And I think that Mike McNair also has the same argument, which is that dictatorship of capital means it is a one-party state. And I think there's a problem here, meaning political pluralism, I'm sorry, it's important. It's important now, even if it's very thin, it's important. The horse race is important, competition, competitive elections, partisan competitive elections. We don't have them in Chicago. Formally, it's not partisan. That's all. Right? Now, I think these things are vital, and they're going to be vital in the dictatorship of the proletariat too. Without that, there's not going to be any socialism. There's not. We're not going to be able to do this process of overcoming capitalism without political pluralism.
I agree with you. I think ultimately, when you overcome the need for politics,
then it's not a one-party state, right?
No.
Then the pause thing is like, well, you're either a revolutionary or you're a counter-revolutionary. It's like, well, that might be true. Like here, you do have to sign on to the constitutional order. Like you can't take an oath of office unless you swear by the Constitution. So in that way, it's a one-party state. But it's not, meaning there still is a great deal of room within the constitutional order.
The Constitution puts in ways in which you can change it.
And, well, obviously there's that. But, at a basic level, like, in other words, like, it's understood that you can't only take office. You have to change the Constitution according to the Constitution, right? Because they disqualified old socialists on this basis.
Because they wouldn't.
No, because they questioned whether they were sincere.
Oh.
Right? Because officially, the Socialist Party did call for changes in the Constitution, but called for doing so constitutionally. But then the Democrats and the Republicans were like, yeah, but you're crazy Marxists, which means that you're revolutionary, which means that you're lying, you're being disingenuous when you say that you want to change the Constitution constitutionally. And they were like, no, we really mean it. We want to achieve power democratically, and that's going to be a revolution. It's going to be a social revolution, and if there's any violence, it's going to be because of like the right wing will take non-constitutional measures to try to keep us from doing it constitutionally. And that's true. That's true. Right. And so, but literally it was like, no, Karl Marx says, and they went to court and they were like, you're lying to us. You're not in good faith. So, we have to really understand, we were reading Hannah Arendt this summer, and she was talking about Marx and Lenin. And she said, the Marxists just forget the fact that, of course, Marx and Lenin, when they're talking about revolution and Bonapartism and this and that, 1848 and Paris Commune, that they really aren't talking about the United States. Right? She's like, if you read what Marx says about Lincoln and the Civil War, and if you read what Lenin says about American politics, their vision is different for the United States, actually. Right? And she's just like, these Marxists, they think...
It was also different for England.
It's also different for England, although England's a monarchy. So there's that issue.
But they felt that there were different... my understanding is...
different strategies. Different strategies because, different political tasks. Meaning if you're in Germany, which is autocratic Prussian state, if you're in Tsarist Russia...
If having a socialist party is illegal, then you can't organize legally and by the rules of the state.
And so here the funny thing is that here, of course, they did kind of make it illegal. I mean, the Palmer raids, I always like to point out that the suppression of communists and socialists and anarchists in 1919 was far more than McCarthyism ever was. Far more. They deported people. They deported Americans. They stripped people of citizenship for being anarchists.
People, really?
US citizens, yeah. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, you got to look into this history. It's really insane. You know? And, you know, it's... So they will do that. They will, right? And they'll do it under the cover of constitutionality. They'll bend the Constitution. And, you know, that's what we're seeing now.
Well, this is why it's so important for the left to not align with either of the capitalist parties, because when they do it, they'll do it now on the basis of getting rid of the racists and getting rid of the sexists and getting rid of the Trumpists and whatever else is concocted. They won't say, oh, we want to get rid of these people because they're trying to change society for the good and we want to hold on to the society as it is now.
Well, they never say that. They never believe that, actually. So they
no, I'm sure they don't believe that, but that's the kind of literal minded people that we're dealing with now that would almost require that the state come out with a statement saying, we are suppressing your rights because you are struggling to overcome capitalism and create a better society, and we are against it. Otherwise,
confusing, yeah. No, people
otherwise,
let's get confused. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, right. Otherwise, if they say something else, you know, the people will pick up whatever their talking points are and regurgitate them.
Yeah,
without thought.
They right. So they have to. I mean, I feel like it's a very basic education that's required. And again, what we're seeing the old bipartisan consensus unravel a little bit, and seeing, you know, the crisis generated by Trump, who I guess had no business ever being in office. I guess you do need like fully vetted, trained mannequins. You know, like that's the only thing that's non-disruptive. You know, did you ever see Trump? He gives speeches. He's like, people ask me why I don't talk like a president. And then he does this impersonation of talking like a president. Hilarious. He's like, I could act like a president. And then he puts on his acting like a president routine.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, it's uncanny, right? Because it's kind of an impersonation of Obama. You know? But anyway, I mean, so my experience of the DNC was, you know, I had a highly mediated experience of both conventions because I was so consumed with the technical stuff, the production teams, the film crews, and I was hanging back. And, you know, so I felt like they were having the experience. You were having the experience. You were interviewing people.
Yeah.
And I was kind of not having that experience. I wasn't interviewing anybody. I mean, I ended up talking to people at the bar or whatever, and so getting a sense of it that way. But I had a highly mediated experience of it, meaning that I had a two-track mind. I had like the official convention going on that I was watching through the media, and then I had the on-the-ground reality, and again, mediated through our attempt to document it, and the sense of what we need to capture of the moment, right? And so, you know, I thought that it was an experience, and I think we're going to process the experience through the editing of the film, and I think you're going to process the experience through writing the script of the film. And I think that the danger is resisting the kind of pre-digested ways of making sense of it. Meaning, I think we have to be open to what we don't have a pre-existing narrative for in this moment. And that's been true of the entire Trump era. Like 10 years on, you know, almost. I mean, he announced in 2015. We're almost 10 years on. The task that people have not risen to is to just be open to the reality of it and not slot it immediately into, oh, we know what this is. Because we definitely don't know what it is. And how can I say that? The capitalist politicians don't know what it is. And that's why they're freaking out. Right? They are having a hard time. Like I said, you know, there's a Sohrab Ahmari article in the New Statesman. he doesn't. It's like he never understood Trump. It's like, oh, Trump's different this time, and it's like, actually he's the same because he wasn't what you thought he was back then.
Right.
And it's like, oh, but he was an insurgent populist, and now he's like an establishment Republican, and I'm like, no, he's not, and he wasn't. Like that's not what's going on here. And I think that's really the threat that he represents, is that we live in a very ossified, complacent political system that feels the slightest disturbance as an existential threat. And that's significant.
And when people on the left also feel that the smallest disturbance is an existential threat, when they say things like, you and your privilege can, manage to deal with this, but I'm vulnerable and I can't. They should recognize the profoundly conservative character of that response. And
the ideological character of it. Meaning, I'm not going to deny that people are vulnerable. They are. But the idea that they're vulnerable because of Trump, as opposed to how they were vulnerable under Obama and Biden.
Yeah, but it's like the vulnerability that people feel, whether it's because they're black or because they're lesbians or for trans or whatever reason, because they're working poor, the vulnerability that they feel is built in.
It is.
To this system. It's not something coming from the outside.
It's not contingent. That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so when something comes along that creates a disturbance, yes, there is a good chance that the people who are most vulnerable are going to have to pay, as the capitalists.
Absolutely. The vulnerable do suffer the most. I mean, what really got me about Obama and brought me back, because I felt like it brought me back to when I was in the trenches with the new young platypus people in the beginning, like 2008 election. Brought me all the way back. So I was 38 years old, and I just, the glibness of it, and so I remember at the time commenting, and it all came back to me now. We are entering an era where all misery and suffering will be acknowledged, recognized, represented, discussed. But absolutely nothing will be done about it.
Yeah.
In other words, what progress has meant is that now all suffering is
instrumentalized,
representable, instrumentalized, but it's understood. In other words, I feel your pain. Like, it's Bill Clinton. Like, that's our time, right? Like, when he signed the Welfare Reform Act, I feel your pain. And I'm like, motherfuck, no. Like, in other words, like, I really, really hated Bill Clinton for that. Also for the super predators, for the, the crime bill, Biden's crime bill, signed into law.
Yeah, which that was universally hated on the left. That was not just, you didn't have to be a Marxist.
No, right. I hated that. I hated the welfare reform. I hated the rhetoric around it. I hated the feel your pain. I'm like, I don't care if you feel my pain. Do the right thing.
Right.
Right. But instead it's, no, we feel your pain. And that's why you should vote for us, because we have empathy. And they don't. And it's also not required, and I don't care. And, look, I'm a Marxist, I'm a socialist. They're not going to do the right thing. So the only thing that I really can take issue with is the rhetoric. In other words, I can't do anything about, what obviously they do things that are gratuitous, they do things that are not strictly necessary, but they are acting basically on necessity. Meaning, cutting back the welfare state, whatever they were doing, all that stuff, right? The only tool that they have for dealing with crime is mass incarceration. There was a crime wave. We grew up with it. It was real. The post-industrial crime wave was real. There was actual social depravity. And the only tools that they had for that was mass incarceration. Under capitalism, that's it. Like, this is the thing. We really need socialism. Like, there's a reason It's not like a nice idea. There's an actual urgent need for a socialist movement.
Mm-hmm.
The capitalist politicians cannot do anything but what they do.
Mm-hmm.
They can do it better or worse. They can do it more or less competently, more or less harshly.
Mm-hmm.
But the basic thing that they do, we can't expect anything else from them. So harm reduction, I swear to God, I can't believe that I've lived into an era where this was the discourse. Harm reduction is just rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, it's like, when they said about Trump, every other word out of his mouth is an impeachable offense. Every other word out of his mouth is a crime because people will die based on what he says. And it's like, no, that's not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the politics, you know what happened? Kamala says that she's building the wall, Doug.
I know.
Okay, so there's no difference now at all. Literally no difference at all. You read the foreign policy paper I sent you.
Mm-hmm. No, wait,
foreign
I started it, but yeah, I need to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not going to be a single difference between them except personality. They're going to make this election pure personality, and on that basis, Trump should win. Because he's a person, he's not a hologram.
Mm-hmm.
Because he is a person.
That's true.
If it's going to be about personality only, then put the fucking foul-mouthed fool in there, not the hologram.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I agree with you completely. Yeah, yeah, but the point about how they can't do anything differently.
That's a hard one too.
Yeah, but it didn't used to be that hard. That's where this all started. That's in 2008 for me, right? 2009, recognizing, this is happening for structural reasons. It's not because they're bad people in power. It's
because Obama is corrupt, or because he has friends from the University of Chicago or something. Or he's putting in the wrong economic team, as if there are any other economic experts except for the people who work on Wall Street. Of course, those are the economic experts.
That was the power of reading Capital and recognizing what the commodity fetish was and all of that. That was what was powerful about that. It didn't develop into a full-blown politics, and we still haven't done that yet, but we're aiming at that. But that was the starting point. It's like, because of the way capital functions, the way it actually works, when it does work, these kinds of things will be the result. The wars, nuclear weapons, mass poverty, mass incarceration, on and on and on, racism, you name it. These are all things coming out of a necessity built into the way
dark.
we are.
It's a very dark world. I was having actually a conversation with Danielle Tutt about the Socialist Party. And, we were talking about, what everybody's upset with me about. Like, why did I have to be so gratuitously provocative around Israel-Palestine, even if what I say, strictly speaking, is true, the way I said it is not good. Right? And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but there's a point, and I'm just me, just Chris Cutrone over here. It's not like voice of God or something. Like, don't burn the page. Don't, throw your screen away because you're angry. But I said, looked at from a certain perspective, of course, the mind of the foreign policy blob that determines like Ukraine and Gaza, right? Just this machine is far darker than anything in the mind of Putin or the Hamas leadership. The reality is darker than any person's attitude or ideology or opinion. That's the hard part, because people, don't like my criticism of Hamas. They think that I'm demonizing Hamas. It's like, look, I understand the system is far more evil than Vladimir Putin or Hamas, and not because Vladimir Putin and Hamas aren't evil. They are, but it's not about that. That's not the true evil.
Yeah, I agree. When it comes to that essay you wrote about Gaza, I felt that it was exactly provocative enough that it that, or if
It's
it was
always a
too
risk.
provocative, if it was too provocative or not provocative enough, it's like the people who were
Judgment.
claiming that it was too provocative are people who would make just about any claim that they wanted to defend their side. So, and obviously what was most provocative about it, I think, was the way in which you called those protesters on the left petit bourgeois and called them trapped in religious ideology.
Yeah.
And willing to see all the massacres that they're seeing in service of their own ideology.
Yeah.
And that I thought was the most truthful thing about it. And it wasn't aimed at Hamas alone,
No.
but it was aimed at the U.S. left that was, for its own different reasons, going along with it all. Now, the trouble was, there wasn't like, oh, well, you're pressing the wrong, that meme?
Where pressing the wrong button. Like I'm sweating. It's like right. Israel or Hamas. Which one?
Right. There was no button to press that would be the right button, right?
Right.
So that was the dilemma that people were in. And I understand that. But I just feel as though, at the very least, the way people should act when they're part of a left that's actually struggling to make political change is they should, when they hear something they don't like and they disagree with it, they should sit with that disagreement. And then they should think about it, and then they should respond with their own argument and paper, and not
rise to it.
We have to just cancel. Yeah.
Cancel it. No, it's like I said back when we launched Sublation at our event in New York. The problem with the left is they identify with the rulers. They really do. Meaning they're thinking, what would I do if I were Joe Biden? What would I do if I were Kamala Harris? What would I do if I were Donald Trump? Well, of course I can't be Donald Trump because he's this straight white, sexist, male, chauvinist, racist pig, and a billionaire, and silver spoon or something. And so
I would not run for president. If I was Donald Trump, I would not run for president. I would hire people to praise me all day, and I would play golf or whatever I wanted to do. I wouldn't run.
Yeah, as he said, he had a great life.
Yeah, but and if I was Joe Biden, I would do exactly what Joe Biden did. If I was Kamala Harris, I would do exactly what Kamala Harris.
They're doing, yeah. But the thing is, again, like the real difficulty is we have to understand that we're not trying to be them. Right, and therefore, what we're doing can't be about what they should do differently. It's
right.
About what we need to do. Right? It's not about what they do or what they should do differently. It's about what must be done by us.
Did you see the uncommitted Palestinian protesters outside of the...
Very, very, very abject, very pathetic. I feel like that dude, I think he's from Michigan. I don't know what his name is, but I've seen him. I feel like he speaks in such a way. It's actually very compelling. He's kind of charismatic in his own way, Palestinian American. But he speaks in such a way, his voice, it sounds like he's on the verge of tears all the time. And I'm like, and it haunted me the way he said Biden. Like there was a certain intonation, and it was very pleading.
Well, they were outside the hall demanding that a Palestinian be given the opportunity to speak from the stage. And that demand is so paltry.
It is.
And
symbolically important. They want to be shown to be part of the Democratic Party coalition.
Yeah, but all that would have done is force whoever gets to be part of that coalition to eventually sign off on the bombs on Gaza. That all that would have done was make them complicit in the crimes they were protesting against, ultimately. I don't think that it would have been important to change policy if they had gotten to stand on that stage.
No, they just, they want, like I said, they want their pain acknowledged. They want their suffering recognized. and that somehow that changes things.
No, but what we said earlier is that recognition of the pain, that feeling of pain, is instrumentalized in service of the continuation of what is.
No, they kind of did them a favor by not tokenizing them.
They did.
Right?
They did.
Potentially. I think it's just a matter of time. Meaning, I think the Democrats are very cynical. Meaning, they called the bluff.
Right.
They called the bluff. And, and I think people even read into Kamala Harris's acceptance speech that, she said this and she said that, but, Israel has a right to defend itself. So people were kind of outraged, at her, like, forthright Zionism or something, whatever they called it. And it's like, well, strictly speaking, states have a right to defend themselves. Right. And I know that that's up for court discussion because, do states don't have a right to protect themselves against people that they're occupying. Like, there are all sorts of legalities to it, but no, right? Because after all, Hezbollah is attacking, Iran is attacking, the Houthis are attacking. So, it's just so murky and rhetorical, and so, but again, people are enthralled to their rulers to this extent that they hang on every word and even the way it's said. Right? Because I think right before the DNC, I told you this, the protesters, the Palestinian Solidarity protesters, considered calling off their protests when Biden was swapped out with Kamala. But then Kamala said what she said, "I'm speaking now," when the protesters tried to interrupt her at a speech she was giving. And then they decided, no, we have to do our protest. And I thought, wow. So if she had said something else, if she had invited them onto the stage to say their piece and then continued with her speech and same policies, not right, then they might have called off the protests.
So they practically did anyway. I mean, at least by the standards of Fox News,
they were never going to get those protests. They were never going to, even if it was Biden, they would never have had a huge mass protest. No, never. This is a fringe issue. It's like I said at our event at the G-Man Tavern, I guess where the local spooks hang out. Luxury beliefs. Right? Like, if you're Palestinian American, yes, it's not a luxury belief, but for everybody else, Palestine's a luxury belief.
We need to get that G-Man Tavern to footage to me because I want to release it to the YouTube. Listen, we've been going for a while. We're gonna end it here. And the second half, if we could talk about the project for a new socialist movement, and you watched the second half where the patrons were part of it. Maybe we could talk about what you thought of that and what it's going to take and what Sublation's role will be. I mean, this is something we talked about before, and we're kind of still developing it.
Developing, yep.
Yeah, people who want to watch that can. I will also release it publicly down the road because at this point we need to have these discussions eventually be in the public domain. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.